Lau, Hong Kong professor of economics, is an SAR executive counselor, and both at Stanford University in the US and the Chinese University in Hong Kong, he's expanded on his specialty in the fields of economic growth, particularly in East Asia and China. And he's a guest speaker at the Asian Financial Forum in Hong Kong. Professor Lau, your work on the Chinese economy in the 21st century is considered to be groundbreaking economic modeling, but what do you see for the future of the Chinese economy?
As you can tell from the 12 5-year plan, the draft 12 5-year plan, that China is going to change in two directions at least. One is to change from export-oriented economy to an economy focusing on its own internal market. I mean, 1.3 billion consumers, a huge market. I think the second thing that is likely to happen is that if we really look at what happened in the last 30 years, Chinese growth basically is driven by growth in inputs, but that really can't continue for too much longer. So I think China will be shifting to a growth that's more driven by technical progress, by innovation.
The American author Vance Packard wrote the book The Consumer Society, but do you see China as being the consumer society for the future?
I think it would be for the next perhaps 30 years or so. I think it would be. They are at the stage where they begin to want things. Right, cars, watches, right, television sets, you name it. I think that's coming. In some sense, it's already happened in the major urban centers in China.
Consumerism is seen as being a very low component of economic growth in China, but do you see that changing for the future?
I think that is actually really based on a misunderstanding. People think of China as being export-oriented, but in fact, the proportion of export to GDP is really not that large. It's around 30%. But what is more important is that the domestic value of the content of Chinese exports is very low. You take something like the iPad, supposedly made in China. The wholesales for about maybe $500 US, right? Do you know what is the value added in China? Less than $15. The basic chip is of course owned by Apple, produced by Apple. The LED, that is actually made either by Japan or by Korea or by Taiwan. Chinese value added is very little.
So should China really begin to build brands and really build them very fast indeed, and more of them?
If you want to sell to 1.3 billion consumers, you cannot do it without brands. There are some very successful brands. One is called Kang Shifu. It's maker of instant noodles. Right? It's by a small, used to be very small, obscure firm from Taiwan. It went to China maybe more than 10 years ago. And they developed this brand. They spent the money on advertising. They also had a couple of tricks. But anyway, Kang Shifu now actually has 40% of the Chinese instant noodle market. That's a huge market. Right? So it's happening. It really is happening. Foreign brands that are doing well would be McDonald's, Starbucks. Right? A lot of Chinese brands are moving in. So I think it has to be the case.
So will developing Chinese brands ultimately push out the foreign brands that went before?
They could, although Coca-Cola would probably stay there forever, right? Could. But I think more importantly, that some of the brands are branching out, like Haier. Haier is actually doing very well in many parts of the world. So I think it's happening. But the important thing for China is that you can capture your own market, your internal market first. And with that as base, then you push out.
So Professor Lau, where does Hong Kong stand when it comes to the brands of China, branding in and out of China?
I think Hong Kong can play a role because people in Hong Kong have much more contact with the rest of the world. They are more current with what's going on. So they could play a very important role helping the design, advertising, in the establishment of the brand. I think that can be helpful. But Hong Kong has never been a manufacturing power. It would never be. So I would say that the contribution would be mostly on the software side.
The other question, of course, is financial services, and particularly where it comes to the renminbi. And we see the renminbi certainly developing in Hong Kong in certain ways, in certain instruments. But do you see that developing both in China and Hong Kong?
I think that is very important. I think it's going to be the fastest growing segment of Hong Kong's market. Many firms are thinking of raising money. McDonald's raised money in Hong Kong. Renminbi bonds. Caterpillar issued renminbi bonds. I think many other firms, I know some Russian firms are trying to raise money in renminbi. Hong Kong firms are trying to raise. The basic point is that you can borrow renminbi at relatively low interest rates. I don't mean short-term, reasonably long-term interest rates. So I think that's going to come. And I think you will see more and more of the trade settlement between, say, China and Hong Kong will be done in renminbi.
And really looking at the renminbi, would you see full internationalization as such?
I think there are many different understandings of the word. What do you mean by internationalization, right? So I think the most important one is really whether people are willing to accept and people are willing to hold the currency, right? You can say that, well, the renminbi is now not fully convertible, not freely convertible, which is true. But you ask people in Hong Kong, right, whether they are willing to accept renminbi, whether they're willing to hold renminbi assets, perfectly willing. That's rising, and because if you ask a lot of people in Southeast Asia to choose between the U.S. dollar and renminbi, many will say, well, I already have enough dollars. Right? I'd much rather take renminbi. So it's really a matter of how well is it accepted as a medium of exchange. The only thing that is really not free, so to speak, is really short-term capital flow. But why should any country welcome short-term capital flow? I think we have been indoctrinated to think that free is better, right? But that's not necessarily the case. I mean, why do we have hot money sloshing around, right? Why is it good? Nobody has been able to say why it is good. Both for the people sending money out and for the people receiving the money.
Asia reshaping the global agenda. That's the theme of the Asian Financial Forum that you're attending. Do you believe that?
I think reshaping global agenda may be too ambitious. Okay, but what's really true over the last 30 years, economic center of gravity of the world has been shifting. That's just a matter of fact. I think another 15 years, Chinese GDP would be the same as US GDP. And the other East Asian economies would also continue to grow. So I think that the East Asia in another 15 years will account for 40% of world GDP.
All right.